Hi there. It's February 7th, 2025. My name is Neat Intel. I assume I am your favorite alleged Chinese spy. But I wanted to talk to you about today is a set of messages that have been broadcasting on the HFGCS since at least the 2nd of this month. This is what they look like. And as it says in the title here for you, I've asserted or at least suggested that these might actually be SKYKING messages. And a few people have both openly approached me and said, no, I don't think these are SKYKING messages. And some also have passively accused me of making clickbait. I'm actually being quite serious. I think these could be SKYKING messages. And since people really seem to be struggling with why I'm making that suggestion, I thought I would put together this video and explain my workings to you. What we will do is we'll look at that chart again, documenting all the messages so far. We'll talk about, as it notes there in the overview, how it is that I'm going about identifying or at least speculating on who the recipient of these messages are. And also we'll talk a little bit about the sender. And then I will compare them to other messages with similar formats or structures that have been broadcast and identified on the HFGCS in the past and explain why I really do think it's in the realm of possibility that these are the latest iteration of SKYKING messages and next steps on trying to figure out what's going on here. So let's take a look at those messages again. But first of all, documentation is important, but so is recording. So for anyone who's interested in hearing these, you have the dates and times documented there. So some of these live streams on this channel this week have been archived for you. Some of these messages are part of a continuous 24/7 stream, which runs in excess of 12 hours, and then YouTube doesn't save it. But at least for the messages on the 3rd, the 4th, and the 5th, those are available to you on the YouTube. Those will also be available to you on the Neat Intel X account, as well as messages from the 2nd, and over here, some of the messages from the 6th. I made sure to post those as well. For the 7th, that's kind of on you guys. As it says in the continuous live stream description, you're not just permitted, you're really encouraged to record things. So if there's ever anything on those streams that you want to make sure is saved, by all means, go ahead. So as it says here, there have been at least 12 messages, 8 of them completely unique. But if you look at the authentications, even for messages that appear to be the same, such as these two, the authentication is different. So in a sense, they are all really unique. I trust the audience enough to recognize that these would be distinct from EAMs or FDMs. I wouldn't be making a video about EAMs of this nature because those are on the HFGCS pretty much all the time. You guys know that. They do actually resemble old SKYKING messages insofar as those used to just be a set of characters, a time, and an authentication. They also happen to match the format of some of the older 274 messages. And they also kind of loosely resemble nuclear execution reports, which we heard back at least as recently as November 2024. And those were kind of exciting, but those didn't have the time authentication, but they did sort of have that same message structure. Later on, we will be talking about these. Now, as mentioned in the overview, we got to talk about identifying the recipient. As far as identifying the sender, so in other words, like these E6s and their respective call signs. So you guys might remember back in January last month, I did do a video documenting how it does indeed appear that E6s are flying dark. Since that video was put out, it's definitely continued, even more substantial, blatant examples than the ones that I go through in that video. But the fact that E6s do appear to be flying dark hasn't, at least as we've been able to tell, really interfered with the ability to identify the E6s that are the origin points or senders of these messages. And just to show you one example, for each of these messages that are in the chart, I put together a slide like this for you. And the screenshots are the position of the plane sending the message approximately at the time it was sending the message relative to their flight path for the respective day. Now, if you guys want, these are the 12 slides. We'll go through them one by one so that if you want to screenshot them, you can. It will be easier just to go over them with this overview chart. But 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. And obviously for those last 4 on the 7th of February, the time I'm recording this, it is actually still February 7th, so the day is not quite over. There may be another message to broadcast. Those flight paths may continue or really will continue on well before the time I screenshotted them. but we'll just go through the overview chart. As mentioned, if you want to hear these for yourself, they're available on YouTube/X, most of them. So you should notice with this, we have, the date for you, the time, the sender. You can kind of go through and see the process there for identifying the sender insofar as which E6 it is. And the call sign is pretty easy to figure out. It's just you hear them use that call sign. And for the net control station or the NCS, that is the call sign that is used by the HFGCS every day for the stuff you're already familiar with, the EAMs, the FDMs, the net check-ins, radio checks, all that good stuff. But for none of the messages that we've heard so far this week, the E6s have not directly communicated them to the net control stations. Insofar as Stratcom, we'll talk about that in a moment. And then unknown, in some of the slides you'll see later in this presentation, I'll be referring to it, air quotes, as entity 3. That's pretty straightforward. So if, the HFGCS ground stations are entity 1, Stratcom is entity 2, then this unknown thing, that's entity 3. And as far as the color coding here, that's just an indication for you of which recipient the E6 was broadcasting to. So for example, this message on the 2nd, the E6 was broadcasting to Sally G, which was Stratcom. Whereas this one, rainfall at 15:37 on February 7th, it was broadcasting to Dandelion, which as far as we could infer was the call sign of the entity number 3, so I have that highlighted in green. So what you'll notice with most of these messages, the majority of them end in Alpha Bravo Kilo, and there are 2 or 3 so far, although these are kind of the same, that end instead in Kilo or Romeo Uniform. That's pretty similar to 274s. That's pretty similar to the nuclear execution reports insofar as behavior we've seen before. You'll also see some repeating elements insofar Romeo Charlie Uniform here, Romeo Charlie Uniform here, Romeo Charlie Uniform here. So you can kind of look through and see some similarities there. Now, one thing that I wanted to talk about was one of these in specific. And this recording is up on X for you, but about 2 minutes before this message was broadcast, Mail Call was contacting Livewire for radio checks. And a minute before, after they both confirmed they had each other loud and clear, Livewire asks, "Do you need any further assistance?" And then Mail Call broadcasts this message to Livewire, which to me indicates that Livewire wasn't necessarily expecting this message traffic from them, which I found interesting. Before we do skip on from these. So some of these flight paths are interesting. This very first one on Sunday, February 2nd, I can't zoom in because it's a static screenshot, but if you were to investigate this one in depth, this thing that looks like a loop here, it actually flew dark for a bit. And, you can sort of infer, or you can't infer, you can guess. Maybe it was flying wider loops. Maybe it was refueling. Maybe it was doing some super secret stuff. Or maybe it was just flying the same loop over and over. But it does come back on, and again, this is its relative position at time of broadcast, so that would have been shortly after coming back online. And obviously, the assumption with this one being the first one documented, we expected that trend would continue. But some of them really, this is another one, it's broadcasting after a loop. This one flew a pretty straightforward flight path, though. It's just in the middle of this thing from, what would that be, Tinker Air Force Base up to Offutt. No complex flight path here. But it does broadcast this thing just west of Kansas. This is kind of a wacky flight path, but it wasn't broadcasting immediately after breaking out of a loop or anything like that. This one, again, fairly straightforward. It's another Tinker to Offutt. This one is quite wacky, actually, but at least at time of message broadcast, it wasn't doing anything totally out of whack. This is a fairly straightforward flight path. So I'm going to leave that for you guys to look through for yourselves, and you will find in each slide, just to make it easy for you, I noted the 3 entities. So what you will notice with these slides, every time I put Stratcom, I have this little question mark. Why am I doing that? So as far as identifying Stratcom, this is a call sign I've been aware of with these daily communications tests. And you guys have watched the live streams or you've seen some of the older documentation. This is pretty much the format, usually within the first hour or 2 of the day. Very rarely, but not never. Sometimes these will happen much, much later in the day. But I can pretty much say this for you off memory without even needing to type this out. You will hear a voice come on and say, mainsail, mainsail. This is call sign with the communications test. Testing, 1, 2, 3. 3, 2, 1. This is call sign with communications test out. That is different from a radio check. That is different from how mainsail does its test counts. This specific terminology, communications test, is only heard when this guy does his daily thing. The call sign that he uses, you almost never. There was an example last year, which I'll leave someone else to document or do a video on. I think I did post about it on X, but you really just hear that call sign used for this. And as I have here, it's not always been documented by monitors because of the reasons that I just said. It doesn't appear to have any apparent consequence. But I did document them myself here and there, but I didn't make a habit of noting like the times or always making sure to get the call sign. A lot of the times, because you only have a few opportunities to get it, and they're not always speaking with the most articulacy. Is that how you say the word articulate? I don't think so. I don't think you mean articulate myself here. But I haven't published this. This is one of my like 1,000 Excel spreadsheets. I do keep track of, the HFGCS, the NCS call sign that they use. And when I can hear it, I annotate the call sign for the daily communications test. And the gaps here could be they don't actually do it every day, but there are also days where they do it. And I can't even take an educated guess on what this call sign is, so don't write it down. This, again, is a static screenshot. You're not looking at a live Excel spreadsheet, so I can't scroll through and give you a big idea of what it looks like. But in terms of going back to identifying StratCom, so I did ask a question because this did come up in the chat box and some other conversation. How do we actually know that it is StratCom that is the source of these daily communications tests? And the answer, at least as far as I took from it, was technically we don't. So the answer I got was in the past, people who were monitoring Offutt Air Force Base heard that same call sign used for other communications during the day. And as I have that on the slide for you, that does actually happen to be the headquarters or central location of StratCom. But as far as, I think I have it for the next slide for you. This doesn't answer the question for me automatically. There's actually a lot of follow-up questions, which I don't think we have the information immediately available. So when was this actually documented? And I don't have it there, but like who documented this? And when was it most recently documented? Are we going off something that was done or observed 20 years ago and nobody's followed up to confirm ever since then? And is a documentation that was made available back then, is that still accessible for people to find? And again, even if that documentation does exist, I personally don't follow how a call sign used for in the vicinity of Offutt, it's automatically fair to assume that that is StratCom. That could just be Offutt. It could be some other thing within Offutt, but I don't think these questions are unfair. I hope no one takes it personally, but I will be talking about this more in this presentation. There is this habit with the shortwave community, and it's one I've tried it before, and I get how it happened, but it's causing problems in the past and continues to. Double check some of this stuff from first principles because it often turns out to not be right. So this is the kind of stuff that I would like to see. It kind of surprises me that no one anticipated that these kinds of questions wouldn't be answered. As far as entity 3, so I think I mentioned it, but as you'll see in each slide, as you see in the summary chart, the net control station, StratCom, at least we're assuming it's StratCom, and then you have this third thing. So that's why I'm calling it entity 3, entity 1, entity 2, entity 3. I'm not proposing anyone seriously start referring to this. I don't want people to start writing up things about entity 3 all the time, but at least for now, in terms of just referring to it by some name, because a lot of speculation is possible. I could give you some guesses for what I think entity 3 is. It could be an E4 on the ground. It could be an E6. It could be Tinker. It could be another thing within Offutt. It could be West Coast. It could be another East. Like, there's a lot of things you could assume. And as I think I mentioned in the next slide or a later slide, I don't know why we'd have to start playing this, wild speculation. I think it could be figured out. So what is actually here on this next thing? Oh, yes. So this slide exists because on February 7th, there's a little bit of guesswork here. So for this set of messages on the 7th, some were addressed to Dandelion, some were addressed to Fire Camp. We didn't hear a daily communications test that day. I don't have anyone who's monitoring Offutt on 311 megahertz, so I'm not 100% sure that Fire Camp is StratCom and Dandelion is entity 3. It may actually be the reverse. What I discuss in this slide for you briefly. So StratCom does have its microphone does have like a certain sound or quality. And as some people point out, you can also identify it using the air quotes here, the DTMF sounds. But as I have in parentheses, entity 3 could also use the air quotes DTMF, so it's not necessarily distinctive. And this is an aside here, but it really does build into the things I'm talking about here. Something interesting happened a few days ago where we heard a bunch of these dial tones, and Null took a recording, and I'll play it for you right now, and I have the spectrogram up, and I have it for a reason. So this was heard on February 3rd. I don't know whether it was 2011 or 2111, but it's not captured on the stream. He heard it on a separate SDR. But just so you can hear it yourself briefly here. So that's exciting. You hear that many tones, you should be able to reverse engineer it and figure out what was this guy actually dialing. Problem. This thing that so many people have been referring to when it comes to the HFGCS as DTMF, which I have for you here. On the left, this is an example. If you look up what is DTMF, it is dual tone multi-frequency. And both in sound and in the spectrogram, you can see here, you could actually reverse engineer and figure out, based on the positioning of the dual tones, what the actual number they're dialing. But as you can see, the spectrogram of the thing we heard on the HFGCS, this is not dual tone. This has 1, 2, 3 peaks at least. So does this one. This one has, I can't tell, at least 3 or 4. This one again, 3. This one I cannot tell. And again, just the side by side here. So again, Null recorded this 2111, or was it 2011? I'm not sure. On 11175 as Tom Thumb attempts to reach a custom to check out of the net. Open question to the monitors. Did anyone ever check that it was DTMF, or were we just calling it that? I don't know. But this gives you an idea why I'm so insistent on revisiting some of this stuff from first principles. So if we hop back here, can we just double check that? I don't feel like that's an unfair line of questioning. There are a lot of people who listen to HFGCS. And as far as identifying entity 3, again, a wide range of speculation is possible. But I tell you what, folks, let's just, can someone, and it's not a small ask, but someone has to be like within line of sight of the Air Force Base, and they'd have to have a radio that can tune into 311 megahertz. So for anyone wondering why I don't do this, the Kiwi SDRs and most web SDRs online, they have an upper limit of 30 megahertz. I'm talking about 300 megahertz. Just give you an idea of how wide this speculation could be. So my guess would be indeed that entity 3 is probably something at Tinker or something at Offutt or one of the Air Force bases. Someone sent me something once, and someone else sent me something similar, and I can't remember who it was. One of them said, please don't post the exact same thing online. So hopefully this is obfuscated enough. I don't think the thing I was sent was real either, but I've made like a artist's rendition, and I think this was someone's speculation on what these lists could look like. You'll have to zoom in, but the idea would be that this would be a list of call signs that are handed out to people so that they're aware, you know, if you're monitoring the HFGCS, or rather you're one of the people maintaining or managing as a net control station, you want to know who is who. So you would be given this list of call signs. So this is someone's speculation or based on something they saw. And again, I've mocked up something similar. And you see on the left, the net control station, site R, and then you have, you know, the E6s, the E4s. This would be the call signs they'd be using if they're up in the air at all on any given day. And then there are a lot of like reserve spaces. And then you have these ground entry points, which is something I've never even talked about because I don't know much about them. And then I don't even know what a couple at the end are. The actual, you know, list, again, I think it's just speculative, but there were like 20 more things. I've kind of given you an abridged Cole's Notes version of what they assume it might look like. So, you know, any one of these could be your entity 3, right? Well, no, not the NCS, and probably not Site R, but maybe Site R. I don't know. Why do there's what I'm trying to say versus, you know, entertaining every hypothetical and having to, you know, one by one rule things out. Allegedly, there are so many people who are interested in the HFGCS and monitor this stuff. If you're in the vicinity of an Air Force base, if you can tune into 311 and report on any given day what you're listening to, and then someone who's monitoring 11175 and hears these messages could start doing some attempts to match it up and see whether that Air Force base you're near, is that entity 3, is that entity 4, you know, whatever the terminology ends up being. But just listening to 11175, you'll get to speculate, but you'll get to speculate forever. So I don't see the point in going through that. No one can monitor 311, then, you know, what are we doing here? All right, moving on. So this is the thing, again, these messages, I'm telling you, don't be so quick to assume that, I'm being disingenuous. I think these could be SKYKING messages. So we need to look at why exactly I'm saying that. And then we'll also look at some context in terms of what else is going on, some other things I think you should keep in mind that might explain this traffic. So I have for you here 2 examples of SKYKING messages and their different structure from various points in its history. So this is one from April 2011. I think I just found this one on YouTube. I looked up a random thing. If you go, on YouTube search bar and type in SKYKING and then do like before : 2012, I imagine this would be somewhere in the top results. But anyways, you see, and this is what most people understand a SKYKING message, air quotes, to be. SKYKING, do not answer. Hotel Victor, time 01, authentication MR. I say again, SKYKING, do not answer. Hotel Victor, time 01, authentication MR. This is Andrew's out. So I want to point out the obvious things here and also the less obvious things. If we compare this to these messages, the SKYKING messages don't have 9 characters, but they do have 3 characters, and then a time and then an authentication. Some people will object and say, well, you didn't hear SKYKING. They're not, saying do not answer. We will address that, but I do want to talk about something else here. So the format of SKYKING messages changed at some point, and instead of, these 3 character codes, they started saying, I don't know, someone with a goofy taste in music. They're usually like these alt rock or like grunge bands. So this is Roses. I can't remember the other names. It doesn't really matter, but instead of these, 3 character trigrams, they changed to that. Otherwise, it's a very similar structure. So this one, Mach 7 radio intercept. You can actually listen to that one for yourself if you like. That's that transcription. And this is just to give you an idea that the structure of these messages do sometimes change. Although, it's fairly easy to follow this one because they're still leading with SKYKING, do not answer, SKYKING, do not answer. So a change to the composition wasn't a big deal. Last year, however, and this is a video on this channel, the Neat Intel YouTube channel, during a SkyMaster exercise event, whatever terminology you like, we heard SKYKING, and this is pretty much what it sounds like. If you want to go and listen to it, you can. But SkyMaster, this is SKYKING, message of 10 groups follows, SKYKING out. And this was very interesting because obviously this is very different from past SKYKING messages. This one came from Andrews Air Force Base. This one, you would have to double check. Let me try for a moment here. I don't suspect I'm going to have any hits, but let me just see. Colossal, did anyone document this? 2019, May 21st. So that may, I can't tell actually. That may have been the ground station. That may have been an E4. That may have been something else. I'd be inclined to assume the Colossal was a ground station call sign that day. Someone would have to cross-reference, but those were coming from the ground stations, presumably to airborne assets. There are definitions of people's speculation with call sign SKYKING means, but this would be SKYKING broadcasting to SkyMaster. SkyMaster, we understand, should be airborne. SKYKING could be a ground station here, but certainly this is not the typical SKYKING message, and I think it definitionally challenges people's understanding of what SKYKING would be, what a SKYKING message is. And I was surprised over the past year to see people who sort of think of themselves as the key opinion leaders when it comes to monitoring the HFGCS had a very mixed reception to this recording, or just sought to dismiss it because they don't understand it, honestly. But this has been some feedback I've seen. People have said that it doesn't count, but they've never really expanded on why it doesn't count. It's invoking the SKYKING call sign, but apparently that doesn't count. For them, there's, apparently something magical about the term do not answer, I guess. It makes it spooky, and they're just listening to the radio so that they can hear do not answer and write creepy pasta. I don't understand, but I really do think it's reducible to just I don't like it. Like, that's not what I'm monitoring the HFGCS for. It shouldn't count. It doesn't count. So, I don't know. I don't follow that rationale. We can see that the SKYKING message format can change. The content of the message can change. I really don't think it's fair to acknowledge that possibility, but prohibit the potential for do not answer to be excised in the interests of expediency. Another kind of message I want to look at is the 274 message. So this is an example pulled up. I think this was from the HFGCS Discord, and I posted a recording to this account on YouTube with appropriate crediting. But as you can see, this came from a parsonage. and they identify it's a 274 of 3 groups. And here you have, 3 groups of 3 characters, time, and authentication. Now, this should immediately remind you of this. We have 3 groups of 3 characters, a time, and an authentication. But this was addressed to all stations. I'm not terribly sure who parsonage is. I think it's fair to assume that it was an E6, but there's also the identification, which the messages that we've been hearing this week do not. So it's very similar, but there are some little quibbling differences that I don't think you can dismiss out of hand. I don't have examples ready for you, but there have been instances of what we assume to be 274 messages, and the person broadcasting never actually nicely identifies for us that, hey, it's a 274 message. Another thing we can look at, and again, this we were dealing with back in November. If you type Intel, NEREP, into the YouTube search bar, you should find the video that I do about this in more detail. But we can compare, this was documented by the late SIGINT on hfunderground.com. This is a nuclear execution report broadcast from 2023, and I remember these because they were, not this one is specific, but I think that should be June, right? I'll have to double check that date that I have there. So just so you guys understand what I'm quibbling about. I think that should be June, but I'm not super sure. Zulu Victor 03414/Zulu//. And then the nuclear execution reports that we heard and have recorded on this channel back in November. Red River, stand by, NEREP for Doom Flight. And this is what that looks like. And he nicely identifies it for us as a NEREP, which we know from documentation elsewhere to be the abbreviation for nuclear execution report. So what we see with these things, even when we know that this is a NEREP, this is a NEREP, it doesn't really stick to a specific structure in terms of things. The same way that, the content of SKYKING messages has changed. And this is what will lead nicely into this aside. So there used to be something referred to as SKYBIRD messages. This is an example from 2020. Pargo32, quote, and this is from EAM.watch's database. We're going to talk about EAM.watch momentarily, but let me just read this out for you. Pargo32 back in November 2020 says, SKYBIRD, Pargo32 break, Brother Zulu time 12:30. I am 30 miles offshore in international airspace. Someone answers back as SKYBIRD saying Pargo32, this is SKYBIRD. I read back, Brother time 12:30 Zulu, 30 miles offshore in international airspace. How copy over? Pargo32 says good copy. SKYBIRD says Roger, SKYBIRD will relay. And that's one example of a lot of messages that are structured pretty similarly, always invoking the SKYBIRD call sign. But back in 2023, Homer 11 over in Europe was heard. Wolfhound. This is Homer 11, Brother Zulu time 0836. I am 12 miles offshore in international airspace. So just from the context here, you have this recurring thing. There's some sort of message format that exists for when these planes are in international airspace and they apparently need to notify someone. Now, these used to be called SKYBIRD messages anecdotally. But this one in 2023, when you hear Wolfhound instead of SKYBIRD, well, what is going on here? Does this mean there are now something called Wolfhound messages? Have SKYBIRD messages been phased out in favor of Wolfhound messages? Or is it just that the name is wrong? These are actually brother messages. I think it's effectively the exact same message. It really doesn't matter what you call them, but just pulled up from the radio call sign list, which is maintained by a gentleman, Ron. As you can see here, SKYBIRD, collective call sign for any Stratcom asset. And I actually continued to keep an ear out for who exactly is Wolfhound, what's going on here. And it was, I think, late last year, became obvious that Wolfhound is something related to Ramstein Air Base. And it looks like Ron did a little bit more researching to figure out what entity at Wolfhound exactly. So obviously this message, whatever it is sort of like devolved versus being, escalate the highest level responsible. Anyone Stratcom, SKYBIRD, that's now been devolved to something local. But you can still see it's effectively the same message format, the structure. It's just quibbling about what exactly you call this thing. And I think, ladies and gentlemen, you should be able to anticipate where I'm going with this, but I don't see any reason to immediately throw out the idea that these messages we've been looking at are indeed SKYKING messages. It's just been devolved to something local. And I can't remember what slide comes next. but oh yes. So EAM.watch, one of the great people who have accused me of making clickbait, they're very good at identifying, I don't like this. Neat Intel saying this is a SKYKING message isn't fair. He's not right. But what the EAM.watch guys have never been great at is being able to figure out what anything is. There is one mistake this week, as I alluded to in the first slide. Is this actually a new idiosyncratic message format? He pulled this up from the EAM.watch database. So if you look this up over there, there's a dandelion in E6, no ID, but that's what someone who entered it said. The dandelion is in E6, and they broadcast message of 25 groups, time, and authentication. Now, there are a lot of similarities here, and I'm going to go through them. So again, broadcast by an E6. The dandelion call sign you might recognize right off the bat because the first one we documented, dandelion. I'm going to assume that's a coincidence. These fun little coincidences, call sign reuse, that kind of thing happens. I don't think dandelion is some super special call sign related to whatever this is, but maybe I'm wrong. What is interesting here is that that same entry on EAM.watch notes the recipient as Dandy Dan. I looked on what other broadcasts were documented on EAM.watch that day. The EAMs were broadcast using a call sign flyfish. Now, there was no documentation of the daily communications test. There was no other additional communications. So at least on that day, Dandy Dan could have been Stratcom. It could have been Entity 3. It could have been something else. But no, actually, these are not new. Oh, yes. And one last coincidence here. I've been pointing out to you guys how so much of this appears to be routine. But November 5th, 2017 was the first Sunday of that month. And that would have been the second month of the quarter, right? October, November, December. And the first message, at least as far as we know, broadcast February 2nd, which was the first Sunday of the second month of the quarter. But just to make a point here, what is this message format? Is this a 274? Is it a NEREP? Is it a SKYKING? And just to make something obvious, so I have an answer for this, but a lot of people who have been monitoring EAMs and FDMs refer to everything as an EAM. So if you're going to get semantic and say that I'm throwing out clickbait, is it clickbait to call an FDM an EAM, or is it just kind of understood in parlance? I think it's understood in parlance. I make differentiations when it matters. Going forward, what really is the difference between a 274 and a NEREP? We're lucky every now and again when the operator specifies a NEREP versus a 274. They'll say the message of 274, or as we saw in the other example, they'll say NEREP, but sometimes they don't, and you have to make an educated guess. And the more I look at these things, is there actually a difference between 274 and a NEREP? Aren't they the same thing? I don't know. I feel like I used to have the answer to that, and like everyone else, now I'm having to look through my own notes and ping pong across Discords and YouTube videos and whatever, which is why I've been saying we need to start working on the website, and that'll be the end of this video. But the point of this video, what's the difference between those things and a SKYKING? Anyone? Do we actually know for sure? I'm not convinced that anyone has a very strong operational definition of what counts as a SKYKING, what counts as a 274, what counts as a NEREP. These could be similar, these could be different, but in terms of, oh, this isn't a SKYKING, this is a SKYKING. Anyways, moving on. Some other stuff that you could look at in the context of what else has been going on to figure out, what are these messages? As I mentioned a couple times during this video, I'm on break. I stopped keeping track of EAMs and FDMs, and I have this little thing on the side. I think there has been an increase in EAMs broadcasts the last couple months, but I haven't been doing it comprehensively. I mentioned it would be interesting to see if someone put together quick comparisons, seeing, how many EAMs were broadcast in January 2025 as compared to January of last year. As far as I know, nobody took me up on that offer. That's fine, because I've talked about this before. I don't actually think the number of messages broadcast any given day is a big deal. Rather, you would want to take a look at prefixes, structures, times, and other data points to start to map an idea of parallels along those lines or substantial differences. Again, I've said this many times, but I think when it comes to the HFGCS, a lot of people get hyped up about the number of messages broadcast a day. And some of our brand competitors, I say this in air quotes, they struggle with counting. I don't really care because, again, I don't think the number of messages broadcast any given day matters that much. It paints a picture, but only to some extent. But for them, it's a big deal, which is why I get really confused at an apparent inability to count. I don't know. Another thing, Obviously, I commented this on X a little bit. I did make a SkyMaster forecast. So someone asked, does this count as SkyMaster? In the exact same way, actually, it occurred to me as I was putting this together. The same way you can kind of get too stuck on specific words or definitions. Like, this is the same thing as this. Very obviously, even though you don't hear SKYBIRD. Is this now not a SKYBIRD because you didn't hear SKYBIRD? Or you just need to change the names of things? For now, unfortunately or fortunately, I'm sticking with it's not a SkyMaster unless I hear SkyMaster. And if it starts to become a recurring issue where obviously something is happening along the lines of what you would anticipate, but no one is saying SkyMaster, do we need to revisit that definition and expand how we understand these things? But at least for now, I don't think it would be fair, and I don't think this actually is a SkyMaster event, is another part of this that's ongoing until I'm proven wrong. But then if I make this open-ended, well, I expect something to happen on February 5th or February 12th, then you're just kind of playing the odds. You can pick any given day on the HFGCS, and if you hold it under magnifying glass, start to find things of interest. But in my opinion, it'd be really wishy-washy for me to, pick something, and even though I don't hear SkyMaster, start to tell you guys, oh, actually, like, my forecast was right after all, even though they didn't say SkyMaster, because this thing happened or that thing happened. I think that would wear its welcome out very quickly. Some of you might be okay with that. Some of you might even want me to do that, but I actually wouldn't be impressed. If next week, February 12th or some other day, or even tomorrow, February 18th, at any point in the next few days, if we do hear SkyMaster, then you can ask the question, was this part of an exercise, which the SkyMaster event is kind of the punctuation mark too? You could ask that, but in the absence of hearing SkyMaster, it would be much too early to speculate along such lines. One other point of context, so I haven't posted about these, but I was keeping an eye on the airspace reservations in anticipation of a SkyMaster event. As it says here, anything when it comes to with airspace reservations, you should be taking with a grain of salt. I don't necessarily know what I'm talking about here. This is not a strength of mine, but I found it interesting that these airspace reservations are now starting to specify weeks. So right now it's week 1. Next week is week 2. I don't think that's happened before. I could be completely wrong. It'll be interesting to see where those go. And again, it's sort of what's going to happen in the future. I can't predict. I can try and forecast, but again, I'm waiting to hear SkyMaster, and that could provide some context for things. But if I don't hear that, then you have to start looking at other contexts and wonder how else can I connect the dots here. So as far as continued monitoring, for all intents and purposes, anyone who's super interested in this stuff, unless you make sure to reach out to me or you sort of see that I've set up a pre-recorded stream. Again, you're welcome to record the live stream and post these things yourself, document it or whatever. I would certainly suggest that you do prioritize recording. I've seen a couple typos or mishearings of things, and it is good to provide things so that people can go back and double check. I mean, even with my own database, I can't promise that I haven't made typos or taken, best educated guesses on something that were probably incorrect, which, is why I did for so long try and make a point of recording things and making it available to people to double check. And just, again, skipping a point here, but I'll go back to it. If you live near an Air Force base and you can monitor 311 megahertz, first of all, I would love to see you do a YouTube live stream similar to what I have set up on the Intel channel. But at least for now, if you can at least incidentally report on the call signs you hear in use that day, that could probably help out people who are interested in this. Another thing, EIM.watch is an easy punching bag, but they do sort of represent something that exists with the HFGCS monitoring thing as a whole. There are a lot of these people who will show up and say, "Well, this isn't that. You don't know what you're talking about, blah, 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 blah. I've been monitoring the HFGCS for 20 years. I've been monitoring the HFGCS for 30 years." There's really few people who've kind of earned that. And then a lot of other people, if you've never shared your documentation, you don't get to be a key opinion leader. Like, I think some of these guys sort of see like they have a right, or they hold this sort of trump card that at any point they can insert themselves into a conversation and be like, "Well, I've been monitoring the HFGCS for so long. You don't know what you're talking about." I'm looking right now to see these messages. These are not hard to look up on Google or Bing or DuckDuckGo or whatever you like, and see, has anyone else been documenting this? And as it shows on the right here, the first message broadcast on the 2nd, as far as I can tell, going off search results, it's only been documented by Neat Intel on X and on YouTube. Now, fair caveat here, I also posted this to the HF Underground forum, and that hasn't indexed on search engines. So it is possible someone is posting this and documenting it, and that just hasn't been indexed either. But this is pretty typical. I'm aware of at least 1 or 2 news groups where people document stuff. I think you should be aware by now. It's not even going to index in a week from now. It won't index in a month from now. I would suggest courteously, make sure there's some way that people can find this if they're interested. I probably would have, I've talked about, I'm going to leave it. But that will actually tie into a special request. So I've talked about this, HFGCS.com. Right now, that is a redirect. It'll just take you to the live stream on the YouTube channel if there is one going. But I have been saying that needs to turn into a website or a wiki. I haven't really visualized what a website would look like. And my impression is people would probably prefer a wiki, so you can just type something in. Old school websites, I feel like, have unfortunately kind of fallen out of vogue and style and use habits. So, and there's obviously nothing precluding, you could do wiki.hfgcs.com and hfgcs.com could still be a website. So it's not necessarily one or the other, but I do think getting started on a wiki would be a good thing. So I'm not 100% committed to this, but if you're someone watching this video, if you have experience setting a wiki up from scratch, not just like, the server stuff or setting up the software, but like setting up templates and, some of those like boxes at the bottom and stuff and sort of setting up some of those interactions and styling and CSS stuff, I probably could get it done with like OpenAI or DeepSeek or whatever, but yeah, it would be good if there was someone there who could kind of do that with a little bit less tedium. It'd probably be annoying. I'd probably be asking you a lot of dumb, customer requests, like, can you do this? Can you tweak this? Da, 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 da. But once it's set up to some point, I'd be able to, take it over. But speaking of, that's possible thanks to the channel sponsors. So on YouTube, Up North has been the biggest sponsor of the, buying people memberships and etc. And over on Patreon, on the Skymaster tier, Paul R continues to support the project. And at the Octopus tier, we have Espresso and Merc. There are also people supporting the channel through Buy Me a Coffee and Ethereum and Solana and other stuff. Thank you very much. If you've sponsored the channel, but you're not being mentioned in these thanks, just, if it's a big deal, make sure you're at least the Octopus tier on Patreon. And that funding right now, since the computer seems to be okay, we reformatted the streaming format, so overheating isn't an option anymore. There's no imminent need to replace it. The money will be going to, the domain fee, which is not very much for hfgcs.com, but, like I said, subsidizing anyone who helps out with, wiki or who helps out with a new stream format or stuff like that, because we are in the closing phases of this operation. So just to recap, I don't have a closing slide for you guys or anything like that, but no, this is not clickbait. I'm not, calling these things SKYKING in bad faith. Anyone who's saying that, I would actually throw the ball back to you and say, what definitionally precludes these from being SKYKING messages? How do we definitively differentiate 274s from NEREPs? How do we differentiate them from SKYKINGs? To be honest, I could probably sit down and go through the notes and give you the answer. But if this is a wider open source community and, there's some form of contribution, you guys want to be key opinion leaders on this stuff, you got to pull your weight as well. Otherwise, yeah, I could call these things SKYKINGs and there wouldn't really be a strong argument against it, in my opinion. So the ball's in your court if you disagree. Until next time, bye.